Once upon a time, everyone in Lake Oswego admired my life, but now it only elicits sympathetic glances and whispered comments behind my back. My name is Mabel Hartley, and yesterday I turned 77, although no one celebrated the occasion. Even my own son, Rowan, limited himself to a formal phone call from work, his words sounding as if he were reading a congratulatory message from a teleprompter. I spent the day as I spend most days, in my spacious lakeside mansion, once filled with laughter and conversation, now empty, like a museum to a long-dead person. My only company is the photographs of my late husband, Preston, a district judge who was respected in Lake Oswego as few before or since. Our house was built in the 60s when Preston was just starting his career. 4 bedrooms, a dining room overlooking the lake, a spiral staircase that I now climb so slowly that I sometimes forget why I went upstairs. My room, formerly ours with Preston, is the only place in this house that I consider truly mine. The rest has quietly become a backdrop for the ambitions of Rowan and his wife, Paisley. I remember how proud Preston was when Rowan announced his decision to go into law. Our boy, so serious since childhood, with his neatly combed brown hair and perpetually furrowed brow. He was 22 when he entered law school, and 30 when he met Paisley Lloyd at one of the charity events organized by the firm where he was working at the time. Paisley was stunning. That's how Rowan described her when he introduced her to us. A slender blonde with cold blue eyes and a smile that didn't reach those eyes. A graduate of the same law school as Rowan, only 2 years younger. She specialized in corporate law. Her father owned a small brewery in Portland, and her mother was a well-known artist in certain circles. "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Hartley," she said, shaking my hand with hers, cool and dry. "Rowan has told me so much about you." There was genuine admiration in her voice, and I believed we would get along. Preston was also charmed by her, elegant, educated with a subtle sense of humor. We thought Rowan was lucky and didn't notice behind her smile what would later be revealed, her calculating and cold nature. However, perhaps we simply didn't want to notice. Too happy for our son. They got married 6 months after they met, and it was a lavish wedding with 200 guests, many of whom were Preston's colleagues on the bench. I remember how Rowan glowed with happiness, and Paisley stood by his side like a prize he had won. That day, they announced that they were opening a joint law practice, specializing in real estate and property law. Hartley and Hartley, that's what they called their firm. Preston couldn't hide his pride. He had been a judge for 30 years by then, and his name opened many doors in Lake Oswego and the surrounding area. We saw nothing wrong with Rowan and Paisley using Preston's connections to attract clients. After all, isn't it for our children that we build our careers and reputations? I noticed the first cracks after Cedric was born. He was born 2 years after their wedding. A strong boy with Preston's eyes, dark brown, attentive. Rowan looked at him with such adoration that my heart melted with tenderness. I thought the baby would soften Paisley, but the opposite happened. She became distant, immersed herself in her work, and left most of the care of the baby to the nanny they hired right after he was born. "We live in the 21st century, Mabel," she said to me when I tried to delicately hint that the boy needed more maternal attention. "I'm not going to sacrifice my career for outdated ideas about motherhood." Her career was indeed flourishing. Together with Rowan, they expanded their practice, hired several more lawyers, and moved to a prestigious office in the city center. Their names appeared in the local press. They served on the boards of charitable foundations and hosted receptions for the city's elite. Preston was proud of their success, although I sometimes noticed a shadow of concern on his face when he watched how Paisley treated our grandson, as if he were just another accessory in her perfectly organized life. Cedric grew up to be a shy but intelligent boy. I tried to spend as much time with him as possible. I picked him up from school when his parents were too busy, helped him with his homework, listened to his stories about his friends and teachers. He was so curious, so genuinely kind, that my heart overflowed with love when I looked at him. Everything changed when Preston fell ill. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late. The doctor said he had months, but he only lived 6 weeks after the diagnosis. I was there every minute, holding his hand as he passed away. Rowan came to the hospital, but always for a short time. Business, Mom, you understand. Paisley only showed up twice, both times accompanied by a photographer from the local newspaper who was doing a story on the distinguished judge. When Preston was gone, I felt truly alone for the first time. 52 years of marriage, and suddenly, emptiness. Rowan organized the funeral, which was flawless in every detail, from the choice of coffin to the list of speakers. I sat in the front row, stunned by grief, while Paisley directed everything like a master of ceremonies at a social event. After the funeral, what I now realize was a carefully planned invasion of my life began. Rowan offered to help with financial matters. Preston left behind a considerable fortune, a house, investments, savings. I had never been particularly interested in money, and Rowan knew that. "Mom, you don't have to worry about anything," he would say, slipping me documents to sign. "Paisley and I will take care of everything." And I signed without reading. I trusted him completely. After all, he was my only son, Preston's flesh and blood. How could I have guessed that his concern masked entirely different motives? Month after month, year after year, I gradually went from being the mistress of my own life to a guest in my own home. Rowan insisted on hiring me a housekeeper. In reality, she was a supervisor who reported to him on my every move. Paisley began to update the interior of my home without asking my permission. She threw out the armchair Preston loved to sit in, replaced the curtains I had once chosen with such love, and rehung the paintings. "You need to keep up with the times, Mabel," she replied to my timid protests. "This house looked like a museum from the last century." Cedric was my only outlet. He was 9 when Preston died, and he took his grandfather's loss very hard. We often talked about Preston. I told him stories from our youth, showed him old photographs. Sometimes I thought I saw in his eyes the same penetrating gaze with which my husband had looked at the world. As the years passed, I noticed how Rowan and Paisley's attitude toward me was changing. Whereas before they had at least maintained a semblance of respect, now I increasingly heard irritation in their voices. My requests were met with sighs, my opinions were ignored, my phone calls went unanswered. At family dinners, which became increasingly rare, they talked over me as if I were invisible. It was especially painful when they used my name and Preston's connections to promote their practice. They held charity evenings in memory of Judge Hartley, inviting wealthy clients and influential people from the city. I was introduced to guests as Rowan's mother, as if I had no personality of my own. "She's so proud of our work," Paisley would say, putting her arm around my shoulders in front of potential clients. "Continuing Judge Hartley's legacy is everything she ever dreamed of." And I would stand there and smile like an obedient doll. Sometimes I caught Cedric's gaze, attentive, as if he could see what was hidden behind that facade. With each passing year, Cedric became more and more like Preston, not in appearance, no, but in his mannerisms, his way of thinking. He possessed the same inner honesty, the same quiet dignity. At 15, he was already interested in legal history, reading biographies of famous judges, including a book about Preston written by one of his colleagues. "Grandma," he asked me once when we were alone, "do you like how my parents use Grandpa's name?" I remember freezing then, not knowing what to say. For the first time, someone had said out loud what I had only thought. "They're doing what they think is right," I replied evasively. "But that's not what Grandpa would have thought was right," he said with a confidence that even Preston would have envied. I just hugged him then, unable to admit the truth even to this boy who seemed to understand me better than my own son. As Cedric grew older, the relationship between him and his parents became increasingly strained. Rowan wanted his son to follow in his footsteps, study law, and join the family practice in the future. Paisley supported these plans, often talking about the Hartley dynasty in legal circles. But Cedric was increasingly interested in history and literature and dreamed of becoming a writer. "That's not serious," Rowan snapped when Cedric cautiously mentioned his plans at a family dinner. "Writing is a hobby, not a profession. You are a Hartley, and you have obligations to that name." I saw my grandson's shoulders tense and his lips tighten, but he said nothing. Later, when we were alone, he confessed to me, "Sometimes I feel like I'm not a person to them, but an extension of their brand. Hartley, and now another Hartley to take over the business." His words echoed in me, because that's exactly how I had felt in recent years. Not like a person, but like an appendage to the Hartley name, which they had so cleverly exploited. All of this led us to the present moment. the final preparations for Cedric's 18th birthday, which Rowan and Paisley had decided to celebrate in style. A pool party at a country club, over 100 guests, including judges, influential lawyers, city officials. In fact, the entire Lake Oswego elite. Not a birthday, but a demonstration of the Hartley family's influence. Cedric didn't want this celebration. He told me he would have preferred a quiet dinner with a few close friends, maybe a trip to Portland to see his favorite band in concert. But his wishes, like mine, didn't matter. Rowan and Paisley had already decided and planned everything. Yesterday, Cedric stopped by to show me the suit his parents had made him buy for the party. Dark blue, conservative, completely not his style. "I look like the junior partner in their firm," he said with a wry smile, turning to face me. "That's what they're going for, right?" "You look like a very handsome young man," I replied, adjusting his tie. "Nothing else matters." He looked at me for a long time, and I thought he was about to say something important. But at that moment, his phone rang. It was Paisley, demanding that he come home immediately for a final fitting. "See you at the party, Grandma," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "Promise you'll come early? It'll be easier for me if you're there." I promised. For him, I was willing to endure Paisley's cold stares and Rowan's condescending attitude. After all, Cedric was the only one who made it all worthwhile, the only ray of light in my increasingly lonely life. Today, looking in the mirror and getting ready for the party, I think about how much has changed since Preston died. My hair has turned completely gray, my wrinkles have deepened, and my back is no longer as straight. But something inside me has changed even more. I've grown tired of the constant humiliation, of having to be grateful for crumbs of attention, of being a living appendage to the Hartley name. Maybe it's time for a change. Maybe at 77 I'm still capable of action. The morning was surprisingly clear for April. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains that Paisley had hung in my bedroom last year, declaring the old ones too old-fashioned. I lay in bed, watching the light play on the ceiling, thinking about the day ahead. Cedric's party was tomorrow, and today I had the inevitable visit from Rowan and Paisley. Last-minute preparations, as they called it. The phone rang at 8 o'clock sharp. Only Paisley would call so early without considering that some people, especially those my age, might still be sleeping. "Good morning, Mabel." Her voice was cheerful and businesslike. "Rowan and I will be over at 10. We need to discuss a few details about tomorrow's event." "No, how are you feeling, or am I calling too early?" Straight to the point, as always. "Of course, Paisley," I replied, trying to sound friendly. "I'll be waiting for you." "Great. Oh, and could you get those old Preston photo albums? We're thinking of putting up a little family photo display in the club lobby. It would be such a nice touch." I felt a familiar pang of irritation. The albums were mine, ours, Preston's and mine, not his. But I had long since stopped correcting such slips of the tongue. "Of course," I said again. "They're in the study, on the top shelf." "Excellent. See you later." And she hung up without waiting for my reply. I slowly got out of bed, feeling my joints ache. At 77, every morning reminds you of the years you've lived. A shower, then a simple breakfast, toast with butter and tea, the only thing I could bring myself to eat lately. The housekeeper Rowan had hired wasn't due to arrive until lunchtime, so I had a little time to be truly alone. Preston's study, now rarely used, smelled of old books and wood polish. I ran my fingers over the spines of the law books my husband had collected throughout his life. Rowan had taken the most valuable copies for safekeeping, but most of the library remained untouched. The photo albums were stored on the top shelf, and I had to use a small stepladder to reach them. 5 heavy volumes in leather bindings, our entire life with Preston captured on paper. I opened the first album, Our Wedding 55 Years Ago. I am in a white dress with a high collar, Preston in a formal suit. We are both so young, so serious. Life seemed like an endless road full of possibilities. Leafing through the pages, I came to the photos of little Rowan, our only child, late and long awaited. How Preston adored him. What hopes we had for this serious boy with attentive eyes. When exactly did he change? When did care turn into control and respect into condescension? Maybe he was always like that, and we just didn't want to see it. The sound of a car pulling up snapped me out of my memories. I quickly closed the album and went downstairs. They always arrived exactly on time, not a minute early, not a minute late. Paisley entered first, impeccable as always in a pale blue suit that accentuated her slender figure. Her hair was pulled back into a perfect bun, her makeup flawless. At 45, she looked 35, and I knew it was the result not only of good genetics, but also of regular visits to Portland's best cosmetologists. Mabel, dear. She kissed the air near my cheek without touching my skin. You look well rested. It was her way of saying that I looked old and unkempt. I had long since learned to read between the lines. Rowan followed, buried in his phone, tall, fit, with a neatly trimmed beard that was already showing signs of gray. My son had turned into a stranger in an expensive suit. Hi, Mom. He kissed me distractedly on the cheek without looking up from his screen. Just a minute, I need to finish this email. I led them into the living room, where I had already prepared tea and cookies. Paisley immediately took a folder of papers out of her bag and laid them out on the coffee table. So, the party program, she began without preamble. We've decided to change the format a little. Instead of the usual banquet, there will be a buffet, which will allow guests to move around and socialize freely. At 6 o'clock, there will be welcome cocktails. At 7, the official part with congratulations. At 8, a performance by a jazz quartet, and then free socializing until midnight. She spoke quickly, without looking at me, as if reading information for the record. And what does Cedric himself want? I dared to ask. Paisley and Rowan exchanged glances with that special expression they always had whenever I expressed my own opinion. Cedric is still too young to understand the importance of such events for the family's reputation, Rowan replied, finally putting down his phone. Paisley and I know better what is necessary for his future. This isn't just a birthday, Paisley chimed in. It's Cedric's introduction to society as an adult member of the Hartley family. Many of the guests are potential contacts for his future career. I remained silent. It was pointless to argue. They would do it their way anyway. Now about your role, Paisley continued, handing me a piece of paper. We've prepared a short speech for you to give during the formal part of the event. Nothing complicated, just a few words about the continuity of generations in the Hartley family and how proud Preston would be of his grandson. I took the sheet and scanned the text. It wasn't a speech, but rather an advertising brochure for the Hartley and Hartley law firm, mentioning glorious traditions and family values. My name was at the end, but those weren't my words. I'd like to say something myself, I said quietly. Cedric is my grandson, and Mom? Rowan interrupted me with that special tone he used when he thought I was talking nonsense. We've already discussed the program with the organizers. Any changes now will cause chaos. Besides, he smiled indulgently, you know how nervous you get in front of an audience. We just want to spare you the stress. I wanted to argue, to say that I had never been nervous in front of an audience, that after years of living with Preston, I had grown accustomed to public speaking. But I kept quiet. Again. Now about your outfit? Paisley looked me over appraisingly. I ordered a dress for you from the Elegance Boutique. We can stop by there after lunch today for a final fitting. I have a suitable dress, I objected. A blue one with embroidery. I wore it to the mayor's reception last year. Paisley pursed her lips. Mabel, dear, we can't have you wearing the same dress twice to important events. What will people think? That I have a dress I like? I suggested with a hint of irony. Rowan sighed. Mom, please, we want everything to be perfect. This is an important day not only for Cedric, but for our whole family. Our whole family. As if I were part of their plans, not just a convenient addition when needed. Okay, I conceded, as I had done countless times before. We can stop by the boutique after lunch. Excellent! Paisley beamed with that special smile she had when she got her way. Now about the financial side of things. Here we go. I knew we'd get to this sooner or later. We've gone a little over the original budget, Rowan began, taking out another folder. The jazz quartet, special lighting for the pool, extra staff, all of that requires additional expenses. We've prepared the paperwork to transfer the necessary amount from your investment account. He handed me the papers and a pen as if it were a mere formality. How much? I asked without touching the documents. $15,000, Paisley replied in a tone that suggested it was pocket money. That's not much for such a significant event. $15,000. enough to live comfortably for several months. And that was for a party that Cedric himself didn't want. That's quite a lot, I said cautiously. Maybe we could cut back on some of the expenses. For example, the jazz quartet. Mom, Rowan's voice took on a note of irritation. We've already discussed this. You don't want your only grandson's birthday to look second-rate, do you? It was pure manipulation, but so familiar. Of course not, I said, picking up the pen and signing the papers without looking at the amount. Rowan immediately put them back in the folder. Great, I'll send them to the bank today. He smiled at me, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. You won't regret it, Mom. It'll be the party of the year. I had no doubt about that. Rowan and Paisley always knew how to throw memorable events. The question was, at whose expense, and I didn't just mean money. I'll get the albums, I said, standing up. They're upstairs. I'll help you, Paisley said, getting up to follow me, but I shook my head. No need. I've already taken them out and put them on the desk in the study. In reality, I just needed a moment alone to catch my breath. Their presence always had an oppressive effect on me, as if they sucked all the air out of the room. I slowly climbed the stairs, holding onto the railing. In the study, I didn't immediately pick up the albums, but went over to the window. From here, there was a view of the lake, calm, majestic, impervious to human drama. How many times had Preston stood here, pondering a difficult case, or simply enjoying a moment of silence? What would you do in my place, Preston? I asked silently. But of course, there was no answer. Gathering the albums, I headed back to the stairs, but stopped when I heard voices coming from the living room. They were speaking in hushed tones, but in an old house, sounds travel in strange ways, and I could hear every word clearly. After the party, Rowan was saying, there's no point in putting it off any longer. Are you sure she'll sign? Paisley's voice sounded concerned. She's been more stubborn lately. She'll sign, Rowan replied confidently. She signs everything I put in front of her. You just have to present it the right way. And how are you going to present it the right way when you're sending your own mother to a nursing home? I froze, afraid to move. A nursing home? They were planning to send me to a nursing home? It's not just a nursing home, Rowan said, irritation in his voice. It's an elite facility with round-the-clock care and all the amenities. Call it what you want, Paisley snorted. It doesn't change the fact. You're getting rid of the old woman to get the house and the rest of the money. I leaned against the wall, feeling my legs give way. Rowan, my son, was planning to get rid of me like I was a useless thing. Don't be dramatic, he said, his voice now cold. Mom can't manage a house this size on her own anymore. She'll be better off under the constant supervision of professionals, and we won't have to worry about her all the time. When was the last time you worried about her? Paisley's voice was mocking. Be honest, Rowan. All you care about is the house and the money. And you're not? He asked sharply. Remind me, whose idea was it to sell her shares last year? And who suggested transferring the fixed assets to our joint fund? I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heart pounding wildly. They sold my shares? Transferred my money? Without my knowledge? They were sensible financial decisions, Paisley replied coldly. She doesn't understand investing anyway. We're just managing her capital more effectively. Exactly. So don't lecture me. We both know what we're after. There was a pause, and I heard the sound of liquid being poured. Probably Rowan pouring himself a whiskey from the bar in the living room. What about Cedric? Paisley asked. He's very attached to his grandmother. How will he react? Cedric is going away to college in the fall, Rowan replied casually. He'll have a new life, new friends. He'll forget quickly. Don't be so sure, Paisley said doubtfully. He and Mabel have always been close. Too close, in my opinion. You're just jealous of their relationship, Rowan said with unexpected insight. Cedric has never been that open with you. Don't be silly, Paisley snapped. I'm just stating a fact. Cedric could cause problems. He'll accept whatever we decide, Rowan said firmly. After all, who's paying for his college tuition? Manipulation again. How had I not noticed before how characteristic this was of my son? So right after the party? Paisley clarified. Yes, I've already prepared all the documents. A little chat about how we worry about her safety. How difficult it is for her to live alone in such a big house. how well she will be cared for at Sunset Manor. She'll sign. What if she doesn't? Rowan paused, then said with a harshness that shocked me, I have power of attorney to manage her affairs in case of incapacity. If necessary, we can go that route. You would declare your own mother incapacitated? Even Paisley seemed shocked. If I have to, he replied evenly. But it won't come to that. She's always done what I've asked. This time will be no different. I stood frozen, unable to move. The albums in my hands suddenly became unbearably heavy. My whole life with Preston, all our memories. And this was how our son had treated it. She's taking a long time. Paisley's voice brought me back to reality. Maybe she needs help? I'll go see, Rowan replied. I heard his footsteps on the stairs and hurried forward, pretending I had just come out of the office. My hands were shaking so badly that I was afraid I would drop the albums. Ah, there you are, Rowan said when he saw me in the hallway. I was about to go look for you. Let me help you. He took the albums from me, not noticing or choosing to ignore my condition. I followed him downstairs, clinging to the railing as if it were a lifeline. My life had just been turned upside down. All these years I thought I had a home, money, some kind of security. Now I realized I had nothing. My own son was slowly, methodically taking away everything I had. And tomorrow, after Cedric's party, he planned to finish what he had started. I didn't sleep a wink all night. After the terrible conversation I had overheard, sleep seemed like an unattainable luxury. Lying in the dark, I replayed every word, every intonation in my head. Get rid of the old woman. Get the house and the rest of the money. Declare her incompetent. My own son, flesh of my flesh, spoke of me as an obstacle that needed to be removed. The morning dawned mercilessly bright. The sun's rays pierced through the curtains, indifferent to my torment. It was the day of Cedric's party, the day after which Rowan planned to send me to Sunset Manor. But I had other plans. All night long, I thought about what I had heard. Not only about the plans to send me to a nursing home, but also about the manipulation of my finances. I remembered the strange documents I had signed without reading, trusting my son. I remembered how Rowan insisted that I give up my monthly account statements. Why do you need all that paper junk, Mom? I remembered how I gradually stopped receiving dividends from stocks that, as it turned out, they had sold without my knowledge. For years, they had been stealing from me, taking advantage of my trust. And I had sat quietly, allowing them to do so. But not today. Today, everything would change. It took me longer than usual to get ready for the party. Age was taking its toll, and my hands were shaking more than usual. Or maybe it was because I was nervous about what I was about to do. The dress Paisley made me buy was elegant but uncomfortable. Too tight at the waist, too long, with a neckline she considered modest but sophisticated. But I found simply inappropriate for a woman my age. The silver gray silk chilled my skin, reminding me how alien I had become in my own life. I put on the pearl necklace Preston had given me on our 40th anniversary, the only piece of jewelry they hadn't yet forced me to update. Cedric picked me up at 4 o'clock. As soon as he walked in, I could see how tense he was. His formal suit fit him perfectly, but he kept fiddling with his tie as if it were suffocating him. Grandma. His face lit up when he saw me. You look beautiful. So do you, dear. I hugged him, feeling him flinch slightly at my touch. Although you look like you'd rather be anywhere but your own birthday party. He smiled crookedly. This isn't my birthday. It's a corporate event for Hartley and Hartley disguised as a party. His insight always amazed me. At 18, he saw the world more clearly than I did at 70. You don't have to follow their path, I said quietly. Life offers many roads. Easy to say, he sighed. You know my parents. For them, there is only one road, their own. I wanted to tell him what I knew about Rowan's plans, to warn him, but I couldn't burden him with that on a day that was supposed to be a celebration, even if it wasn't for him. Whatever happens, I said instead, remember that I will always love you, always. He looked at me strangely, as if he sensed something in my voice. Is something wrong, Grandma? You seem different today. It's just old age, dear, I smiled, trying to make the smile look convincing. Sentimentality comes at the most unexpected moments. He clearly didn't believe me, but he didn't insist. This tact, this sensitivity to other people's boundaries, where did Rowan and Paisley's child get it from? The Lake Valley Country Club was located 20 minutes drive from the city. It was a place where the elite of Lake Oswego gathered. Business people, politicians, celebrities. Membership in the club cost a fortune, but Rowan and Paisley never spared any expense when it came to making the right connections. The driveway was lined with expensive cars when we arrived. Cedric drove slowly, as if delaying the inevitable. "Are you ready?" I asked when he turned off the engine. "No," he replied honestly. "But when has that ever mattered?" We walked in together, and I felt him squeeze my hand discreetly as if seeking support. At that moment, I became even more determined. For his sake, if not for my own. Rowan and Paisley greeted guests at the entrance. She looked stunning in a champagne-colored dress, her hair styled in an elaborate updo that accentuated her high cheekbones. Rowan stood beside her, the epitome of success in his impeccable suit, with the confident smile of a man accustomed to universal admiration. "Mom, Cedric!" Rowan put his arm around his son's shoulders, ignoring his tension. "Finally, half the guests are already here. We're right on time," I remarked. Rowan chose not to hear me. "Mabel, dear." Paisley gave me a critical look. "The dress fits beautifully, but my goodness, what's happened to your hair? I told you we should have made an appointment with a stylist." "I like Grandma's hair," Cedric interjected. "It's natural." Paisley gave him a look that could be translated as, "You're too young to understand." "Come on," Rowan led us inside. "I want to introduce you, Cedric, to some important people." The club was decorated with a taste that clearly belonged to Paisley. Minimalist elegance, a silver-white color scheme, no bright colors or frivolous details. A string quartet played in the central hall, and waiters in immaculate suits served champagne and canapes. The pool, visible through the glass doors of the terrace, was lit up so that the water seemed almost unnaturally blue. I noticed Rowan leading Cedric from group to group, introducing him as our son, the future partner of the firm. Each time, Cedric's face became more and more frozen, his smile more and more forced. Paisley glided among the guests, charming and flattering, occasionally casting controlling glances in my direction, as if afraid I might say or do something inappropriate. I kept to myself, watching, partly because no one was particularly eager to talk to me. I was just Rowan's old mother, a living reminder of the late Judge Hartley, but mostly because I needed to gather my thoughts before what I was about to do. By 7 o'clock, the hall was full. Over 100 people, the cream of Lake Oswego society and the surrounding area. Judges, lawyers, business people, politicians. All the people Rowan and Paisley considered important to their careers. I recognized some of them, Preston's old friends, colleagues we used to socialize with. Many of them nodded politely at me, but no one came over to talk. At 7:30, Rowan took the microphone for the official part of the evening. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice sounded confident and authoritative, "thank you to everyone who has joined us today to celebrate the 18th birthday of our son, Cedric Hartley." Applause rang out. Cedric stood next to his father, smiling tensely. 18 is a special age. It's the age when a boy becomes a man, when decisions are made that will shape the rest of his life, Rowan continued. Paisley and I are honored and delighted to see our son enter this new stage of life, ready to continue our family traditions. I saw Cedric's shoulders tense at these words. Next month, Cedric will graduate from high school, and in the fall, he will enter law school, Rowan announced, prompting another round of applause. The first step toward one day becoming a partner at Hartley and Hartley. I knew that wasn't true. Cedric had received invitations from several prestigious universities, but none of them were related to law. He dreamed of studying history and literature, perhaps becoming a writer. But in Rowan and Paisley's world, such dreams had no place. This was followed by a series of congratulations from important guests. Judge Caldwell, a longtime friend of Preston's, the mayor, the president of the Bar Association. Each of them spoke of a promising young man, a worthy successor to the illustrious Hartley name. No one seemed to notice how, with each word, Cedric withdrew further into himself. Then Rowan spoke again. And of course, on a day like this, We cannot fail to remember the man who would have been especially proud today. My father, Judge Preston Hartley. He paused, bowing his head in feigned grief. And I would like to invite to the microphone the person who was by his side throughout his life, my mother, Mabel Hartley. I slowly moved toward the podium, feeling the eyes of everyone present on me. Rowan handed me a sheet of paper with a prepared speech, but I ignored it. I had my own words. I took the microphone and glanced around the room. So many familiar faces, so many people who knew Preston, who, I once thought, respected me too. I stand before you today not only as Rowan's mother and Cedric's grandmother, I began, but also as a person who has lived a long life filled with both joys and disappointments. I noticed how tense Paisley became, clearly not expecting me to deviate from the script. Preston was not only an outstanding judge but also a fair man. He believed that the truth, however bitter, was always better than the sweetest lie. Rowan took a step forward, clearly intending to interrupt me, but I continued, raising my voice. My grandson, Cedric, standing before you today, inherited not only his grandfather's appearance, but also his inner strength, his honesty, his ability to see through people. I looked at Cedric, whose eyes widened in surprise. I'm proud of you, Cedric. I'm proud not because you're going to be a lawyer, as your father just announced, but because you had the courage to follow your own path. Your admission to Brown to study literature is... Mom! Rowan almost snatched the microphone from me. Mom's a little confused today, he said to the guests with a forced smile. Age, you know. I backed off, realizing that direct confrontation would get us nowhere. But what I was about to do required a different approach. The evening continued. Buffet, music, small talk. I kept to myself, watching as Rowan and Paisley moved from group to group, charming people, making connections, promoting their firm under the guise of a party for their son. Cedric found me on the terrace where I was standing looking at the illuminated pool. What you said, he began. How did you know about Brown? I didn't tell anyone I applied there. An old woman has her ways of finding things out, I smiled. I'm proud of you, Cedric. Really proud. Father will be furious, he said, looking around nervously. He always thought I would go to law school. Your life belongs to you, I said, taking his hand. Don't let anyone, not even your parents, dictate your path. We stood silently, looking at the water. At that moment, Rowan and Paisley approached us, both with tense smiles. There you are, Rowan said, putting his hand on Cedric's shoulder. Judge Bradford wants to talk to you about law school. I'm not going to law school, Dad, Cedric said quietly but firmly. Rowan's face froze for a moment. We'll discuss this later, he said through clenched teeth. Now, please don't embarrass the family and go talk to the judge. Cedric glanced at me apologetically and obeyed. As soon as he was gone, Rowan turned to me. What do you think you're doing? His voice was quiet but full of rage. First that speech, now turning him against us? I'm telling him the truth, I replied calmly. Something you and Paisley never did. Mabel, dear, Paisley interjected with feigned concern. You look tired. Perhaps you should go home. I can call a taxi. I feel fine, I retorted, and I'm not going anywhere. Rowan leaned closer, his voice threatening. After what you've done, you'd better keep quiet for the rest of the evening. Otherwise what? I looked him straight in the eye. Send me to Sunset Manor earlier than planned? His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. What are you talking about? I overheard your conversation yesterday, I said. All about your little plan to get rid of the old woman and take over the house and the money. Paisley turned pale. Rowan, on the other hand, flushed. You were eavesdropping? His voice trembled with anger. And you were stealing my money, I replied. Which is worse? Several guests nearby turned around at the raised voices. Rowan noticed and forced a smile. Mom's joking, he said loudly. Right, Mom? I said nothing, just looked at him. For the first time in many years, I saw fear in his eyes. I think you really should go home, he said more quietly. You're clearly not yourself. I'm not going anywhere, I replied firmly. It's my grandson's birthday, and I have a right to be here. Rowan looked as if he wanted to say something, but at that moment one of the guests approached us, an elderly lawyer, a longtime client of their firm. Rowan Paisley, he smiled, oblivious to the tension. What a wonderful evening. And this must be Mrs. Hartley? I've heard so much about you from Preston. Rowan was forced to switch into gracious host mode. I took the opportunity to slip away. I needed to gather my thoughts before what I was about to do. The evening continued. Cedric was surrounded by Rowan and Paisley's friends, each of whom felt it their duty to give him advice about a career he had no desire to pursue. I saw him nod politely and smile, but his eyes were becoming increasingly vacant. Around 10 o'clock, Rowan took the microphone again to propose a toast to Cedric. Champagne flowed freely, and all the guests went out onto the terrace where a temporary stage had been set up. "To my son," Rowan proclaimed, raising his glass. "To the future of the Hartley family." Everyone joined in the toast. I stood near the pool, staring at the artificially blue water. Suddenly, I felt Rowan come up behind me. "I know what you're up to," he hissed in my ear, "and I won't let you ruin everything. Tomorrow you'll sign the papers to move to Sunset Manor." I turned to him, feeling a wave of anger rise within me, anger that had been building up for years. "You've always been greedy, Rowan," I said quietly, "even as a child, but I never thought you would become such a petty person." His face contorted with rage. Paisley, noticing us, hurried over. "What's going on?" she asked, looking from me to Rowan. "Nothing," he replied, keeping his eyes on me. "Mom just needs a refreshing treatment. She's gotten too heated." And before I could understand what was happening, he shoved me hard in the chest. I lost my balance and fell into the pool, plunging into the cold water with a loud splash. The shock of the fall paralyzed me for a moment. Water poured into my nose and mouth, my clothes instantly soaked, weighing down my body. I flailed, trying to get to the surface, hearing muffled voices and laughter. When I finally surfaced, gasping for air, the first thing I saw was Paisley's face contorted with laughter. Rowan stood next to her, a smug grin on his face. "Refresh yourself, Mom," he said loudly, eliciting another wave of laughter from some of the guests. Others looked shocked. Cedric rushed to the pool, reaching out his hand to me. "Grandma!" His face was contorted with concern. "Are you okay?" With his help, I climbed out of the water, shivering from the cold and humiliation. My dress clung to my body, my hair hung in wet strands, and my makeup was undoubtedly smeared. Someone threw a towel over my shoulders. Someone else offered to call a doctor. Paisley continued to giggle, covering her mouth with her hand as if that could hide her malice. Rowan stepped forward, feigning concern. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't mean to make you fall." "Just kidding." I saw the insincerity in his eyes, saw that he felt no remorse whatsoever. It was his way of putting me in my place, showing me who was boss. But he didn't take one thing into account. Over the long years of humiliation and manipulation, so much anger and determination had built up inside me that even falling into the pool couldn't extinguish it. I straightened up as much as my wet dress would allow and looked at the silent guests. "Microphone," I said calmly, holding out my hand. "Mom, you need to change," Rowan began, clearly alarmed by my reaction. "Microphone," I repeated more firmly. To my surprise, one of the waiters, a young man with sympathetic eyes, handed me the wireless microphone that the host of the evening had been using. I turned it on and took a deep breath. Water dripped from my hair, and a puddle formed at the hem of my dress, but at that moment I felt stronger than ever. "Dear guests," I began, and my voice, amplified by the microphone, carried across the quiet terrace. "While I was freshening up, I want everyone to refresh their memory. Cedric is not Rowan's biological son, and Paisley knows this very well." The words hung in the air, as if they were physically tangible. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Even the noise of the ventilation seemed to stop. I stood there, water dripping from my wet dress, forming a puddle on the immaculate terrace floor. But I didn't care. I stared straight at Rowan, whose face changed in a split second from smug superiority to shock, then to rage. Paisley froze, her mouth half open, her hand holding a glass of champagne frozen halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened in horror, her cheeks instantly paled, as if all the blood had been drained from them. But it was Cedric's face, shocked, confused, suddenly very young, that made me hesitate for a moment. Did I have the right to destroy his world so abruptly? But the doubt quickly faded. The truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a lie, especially a lie built on manipulation and deception. Paisley was the first to break the silence. Her silvery laughter, like the sound of broken glass, cut through the frozen air. My God, what ridiculous nonsense, she exclaimed theatrically, addressing the guests. Poor Mabel. The fall clearly did her no good. The guests began to whisper among themselves. Some looked at me with pity, others with poorly concealed curiosity. Such scandals were rare in their respectable society, and many were clearly enjoying the spectacle. Rowan quickly regained his composure. He stepped forward, putting his arm around Cedric's shoulders in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Mom, his voice sounded concerned, but I could hear a note of panic in it. You need to sit down. The fall has clearly affected your condition. He turned to the guests, forcing an embarrassed smile. I apologize for this misunderstanding. Lately, Mom has been confused. Age, you know. I gripped the microphone tighter, not about to give up. I'm fully conscious, Rowan. My voice was steady and confident, and I know exactly what I'm talking about. Cedric stood between us, his gaze darting from me to my father, then to my mother. His face expressed such a mixture of emotions that it physically hurt me. Is this true? He finally asked, turning to Paisley. She instantly put on a mask of offended innocence. Cedric, dear, you don't believe this nonsense, do you? Grandma Mabel isn't herself. She needs help. Then why did you turn so pale? His voice trembled, but there was steel in it. At that moment, he looked so much like Preston that it took my breath away. Rowan decided to change tactics. He let go of Cedric's shoulders and stepped toward me, his face contorted with rage. How can you say such things? He hissed through clenched teeth. On my son's birthday? You've lost your mind, old woman. The insults, hurled in front of everyone, caused some of the guests to gasp. Judge Bradford, an old friend of Preston's, took a step forward, clearly intending to intervene, but I stopped him with a gesture. I haven't lost my mind, Rowan, I replied calmly. And I have proof. I turned to Cedric, whose face now expressed only pain. I never wanted to hurt you, dear, but you deserve to know the truth, especially now that you're starting out on your own path. Paisley jumped up to me, her eyes flashing with rage. Stop it right now, she hissed. You have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, I know enough, I replied, looking her straight in the eye. I know about your affair with Griffin Prescott about a year after your wedding. I know that's when you got pregnant with Cedric. And I know you never intended to tell the truth to Rowan or your son. Paisley's face contorted with horror. With Griffin Prescott, a successful architect who now lived in Portland, had worked on the design of their first office shortly after Rowan and he had opened their practice. I guessed that there was intimacy between Paisley and Griffin from overheard conversations and Paisley's strange reactions when his name was mentioned. How do you? She faltered, unable to finish the question. How do I know? I allowed myself a slight smile. Age has its advantages, Paisley. People stop noticing you. They talk in your presence as if you weren't there. They don't watch what they say. I turned to the guests, many of whom were now listening with undisguised interest. 4 months ago, I overheard Paisley talking on the phone. She thought no one was home. She was talking to Griffin Prescott, yes, the architect whose designs are so highly praised in Portland. She was crying and saying, "He looks more and more like you, and I don't know how long I can keep this secret." Paisley's face turned into a mask of horror. I saw her eyes dart to Rowan, who froze as if struck by lightning. After that, I started noticing things I hadn't seen before. How Paisley always got nervous when someone mentioned Cedric's resemblance to Rowan. How she diligently emphasized the traits that Cedric supposedly inherited from the Hartley family. How she reacted to any mention of the genetic tests that are so popular now. I paused, allowing the words to sink in. But suspicions are one thing and facts are quite another. So I did what any caring grandmother would do. I ordered a DNA test. Rowan seemed to finally snap out of his stupor. What nonsense? He raised his voice, trying to drown out the whispers spreading among the guests. You couldn't have done any test without my knowledge. It wasn't difficult, I shrugged, feeling strangely calm. You have a habit of leaving your coffee unfinished. And Cedric has a habit of chewing on pencil tips. DNA samples are everywhere if you know where to look. In reality, I was bluffing. There was no DNA test, but I knew I had hit the mark just by the looks on Rowan and Paisley's faces. Years of observation, stray comments, strange reactions, it all came together in a picture that was now confirmed by their own horror. The results came back 2 weeks ago, I continued with my lie. Rowan is not Cedric's biological father. The probability of paternity is 0%. She's lying, Rowan shouted, his face flushed red. This couldn't have been done without my consent. Then let's do an official test, I suggested calmly. Right now. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize publicly and voluntarily check myself into a psychiatric clinic. Cedric, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said, "Is it true, Mom?" His voice was quiet, but in the ensuing silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Paisley froze, staring at her son. Her eyes showed panic mixed with guilt. Cedric, sweetie, this is all some kind of misunderstanding. Just answer the question. His voice grew stronger. Is Rowan my father? Paisley opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. And that silence was more eloquent than any confession. Cedric nodded slowly, as if he had received confirmation of something he had always known subconsciously. I see, he said, and there was so much pain in that simple word that I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Rowan seemed to finally realize what was happening. He turned to Paisley, his hands clenched into fists. Is this true? His voice trembled with barely contained rage. You've been lying to me all this time? Letting me raise someone else's child? Paisley took a step back, her face contorted with fear. Rowan, please, not here. Let's discuss this at home. So it's true, he was almost shouting now. 18 years. You've been leading me on for 18 years. The guests, clearly embarrassed by the scene unfolding before them, began to whisper quietly. Some retreated toward the exit, while others, on the contrary, moved closer, not wanting to miss the rest of the drama. I think the party's over, Judge Bradford said, trying to defuse the situation. Maybe we should all... No one's going anywhere, Rowan barked. Not until I know the truth. The whole truth. He turned back to Paisley, who now looked completely crushed. Who's the father, this Prescott guy? Paisley remained silent, her eyes downcast. Answer me. Rowan took a step toward her, and I was afraid he might hit her. Yes, she finally managed. Griffin is Cedric's father, but it was early in our marriage when you were constantly busy, when we were just starting our practice. You lied to me. His voice dropped to a whisper, but there was so much pain in it that I almost felt sorry for my son. Almost. You made me believe he was mine. I loved you, Paisley exclaimed, suddenly finding the strength to defend herself. But you were always busy, obsessed with work and success. Griffin was the only one who saw me, listened to me. It only happened once or twice, but her words, meant to justify herself, only made the situation worse. I saw Rowan flinch as if he had been struck. So I didn't pay enough attention to you and you decided to get revenge? He asked quietly. And then you made me raise his child? Paisley, realizing her mistake, tried to correct herself. No, that's not it. I really did love you more after that. We started a family, built a life. Built on lies, Rowan finished for her. All this time, Cedric stood motionless, his face becoming increasingly closed off. Finally, he turned and headed for the exit. Cedric! Paisley rushed after him. Wait, I'll explain. He stopped and turned to her, his eyes dry but filled with such pain that my heart sank. Explain what? He asked quietly. How you both used me my whole life. How you forced me to be someone I'm not. How you planned my future without asking what I wanted. He shook his head. I always felt that something was wrong. I always knew that I didn't fit into your perfect plan. Now I understand why. He looked at Rowan. You never truly loved me. I was just an extension of your ego, a way to perpetuate the Hartley name. Then he looked at Paisley. And you just used us both. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Paisley standing with her hand outstretched. The guests were now openly rushing to leave the party. No one wanted to witness the collapse of the Hartley family, although I had no doubt that tomorrow the whole of Lake Oswego would be buzzing with gossip. Rowan finally seemed to remember me. He turned, his face contorted with hatred. Are you happy now? He asked, coming closer. You destroyed our family. I shook my head. No, Rowan. You and Paisley did that yourselves many years ago. I just told the truth that you both hid. You had no right. He was almost shouting now. It wasn't your secret. What about my money? My house? I asked calmly. The ones you planned to take by sending me to a nursing home? Was that not my secret either? He took a step back, clearly not expecting this turn of events. You can't prove anything, he said finally. You didn't sign any documents. Of course I did, I smiled. Lots of documents, didn't I? The question is, were they all what you said they were? And what will the Bar Association say when it finds out that you abused your own mother's trust to take possession of her property? Rowan's face turned pale. He knew I was right. Any investigation into his financial machinations could cost him not only his reputation but also his career. You're bluffing, he said, but without conviction. Maybe, I shrugged. But are you willing to take that risk? Especially now that your personal life is already in ruins? I looked at Paisley, who was standing with her arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to protect herself from reality. You two deserve each other, I said quietly. Both of you are willing to use others to achieve your own goals. You've both been living a lie for so long that you may no longer remember what the truth is. I took the wet towel off my shoulders and threw it on the floor. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to leave. This evening has been quite refreshing for me. I turned and walked toward the exit, feeling the eyes of the few remaining guests on me. No one stopped me, no one said a word. Even Rowan seemed to have lost the ability to speak. Judge Bradford caught up with me in the lobby. His face was a mixture of shock and involuntary admiration. Mabel, he shook his head. You've always been a strong woman, but tonight, Preston would be proud of you. Thank you, Henry, I replied, feeling a lump in my throat for the first time that evening. Can you call me a taxi? I'm afraid my son is in no condition to drive me home right now. Of course, he nodded. And if you need legal assistance, well, you know where to turn. I returned home around midnight. The taxi called by Judge Bradford took me to the familiar porch where I had spent most of my life. For the first time in a long time, I experienced a strange feeling as I walked through my own door. Not fatigue, not melancholy, but some kind of unexpected relief. It was as if a heavy stone that I had been carrying around my neck for many years had suddenly fallen away. I even breathed more deeply. The house was quiet and dark. The housekeeper, who usually left at 8 in the evening, had left only a small lamp on in the hallway. Going up to my room, I stood under the hot shower for a long time, washing away not only the chlorinated water from the pool, but also, it seemed, years of submission, silent consent, fear of offending, disturbing, upsetting. Water flowed over my old body, and I thought about how difficult it sometimes is to find the courage to tell the truth. Even if that truth is obvious, even if silence is destroying you from within. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the phone ringing. The clock showed 7:30 a.m., too early for any decent person, which meant it could only be Paisley. But when I answered, it was Cedric's voice on the other end of the line. Grandma, are you awake? Not anymore, I replied, but without irritation. Where are you, dear? At a motel on the outskirts of town. His voice sounded tired but calm. I couldn't go home yesterday. Not after everything that happened. Of course. I sat up in bed, trying to wake up completely. Are you okay? I don't know, he replied honestly. Probably not, but I'll be fine. We were silent for a while. I could hear him breathing, imagining him sitting in a faceless motel room, a young man whose world had fallen apart in one evening. Did you know all along? He finally asked. No. I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. I only suspected it for the last few months. And even then, I wasn't sure until last night. Your parents' reaction said more than any confession ever could. So there was no DNA test? Perceptive boy, as always. No, I admitted. It was a bluff. But if you want to know for sure, you can have the test done. The truth opens many doors, Cedric, but not all of them lead to places you want to go. He sighed. and there was so much adult weariness in that sound that my heart sank. I already know it's true. I saw it in Mom's face, in the way she couldn't answer a simple question. "What are you going to do?" I finally asked. "I don't know," he sighed again. "I took some money out of my account and rented this room. I think I'll stay here for a couple of days to think things over. Maybe then I'll go to see a friend in Portland. He's been asking me to visit for a long time." "You can come stay with me," I offered. "There's plenty of room in the house." "Thanks, Grandma, but I need to be alone right now. I promise I'll be in touch soon." When we finished talking, I sat on the bed for a long time, staring out the window. The sky was overcast, which was unusual for this time of year, but it perfectly reflected my mood. I was worried about Cedric, but deep down, I knew he would be fine. Around 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Linda Willis, a neighbor with whom I was friendly, was standing on the porch. She was holding a basket of baked goods. "Mabel, dear," she kissed me on the cheek, "I thought you could use some support today." It was clear from her face that news of yesterday's scandal had already spread throughout Lake Oswego. "Come in." I invited her into the house. "Coffee?" We sat on the porch sipping coffee and pretending it was a normal social visit, not an attempt to pry details about the scandal. Finally, Linda couldn't take it anymore. "Is it true? What they're saying about yesterday?" "What are they saying?" I asked, although I had a pretty good idea of the rumors already circulating. "Well," Linda leaned forward, "they're saying you publicly declared that Cedric isn't Rowan's son, and that Paisley has been deceiving him all this time, and that the real father is some architect from Portland." I took a sip of coffee, looking out at the lake. "In general, yes, that's what happened." Linda sat up straight, clearly pleased with the confirmation of the gossip. "My God, Mabel, what a scandal! How did you find out?" "An old woman has her ways," I replied evasively. That evening, Linda called again, full of new gossip. "Mabel, you have no idea what's going on." Her voice sounded excited. "Paisley has moved all her things out of the house. They say she moved in with a friend in Portland, and Rowan, well, he was at the Blue Oyster Bar this afternoon, already dead drunk. He was shouting something about betrayal and making everyone pay." I listened silently, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. On the one hand, I felt sorry that my son's life was falling apart in front of the whole town. On the other hand, I understood that this was the consequence of his own actions. "What about their law practice?" I asked, when Linda paused. "Oh, it's complete chaos." She clearly relished the drama. "Half of their clients have already dropped them. They say Judge Hollingsworth personally called Rowan and said he wouldn't tolerate someone with that kind of reputation handling his cases. And he was their biggest client." I had no doubt that was true. In Lake Oswego legal circles, reputation meant everything. And Rowan and Paisley's reputation was now ruined, not only by the scandal surrounding Cedric's paternity, but also by their own behavior after the revelation. The next day, I called Henry Bradford. I needed the advice of someone who understood the law and was not part of Rowan's camp. "Mabel," his voice sounded warm, "how are you feeling today?" "Strange," I replied honestly. "Like I woke up after a long sleep." "Well, your awakening was certainly dramatic," he said with a smile in his voice. "The whole town is talking about it." "I can imagine," I sighed. "Henry, I need advice. Legal advice." I told him about overhearing Rowan and Paisley's conversation about plans to send me to a nursing home, about my suspicions that they had been manipulating my finances, about the documents I signed without reading. Henry listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "This is a serious situation," he finally said. "If you're right, and Rowan really did transfer your assets without proper disclosure and consent, it could have serious consequences for his legal career." "I don't want my son to go to prison," I said, surprising myself. After everything he had done, I still cared about him. "I just want to regain control of my life and my property." "I understand." Henry nodded. "In that case, we need to proceed with caution. I suggest we start with an audit of your finances." We agreed that he would come to my office the next day with a financial advisor he trusted. "In the meantime," he added before we said goodbye, "be careful with Rowan. He's backed into a corner, and that makes people unpredictable." I promised to be careful, even though deep down I didn't believe my son could hurt me. Despite everything that had happened, I still saw in him the serious boy that Preston and I loved so much. As it turned out, Henry's warning was not in vain. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, as I was sorting through old letters in Preston's office, the front door burst open. I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, and a moment later, Rowan stormed into the office, his face contorted with rage. "Are you satisfied?" He almost spat out the words. "You've ruined my life!" I slowly got up from the table, trying not to show how frightened I was by his sudden appearance. "Hello, Rowan," I said calmly. "What exactly has brought you to this state?" "Don't pretend you don't know." He slammed his fist on the table. "The whole town is talking about yesterday's scandal. Clients are refusing our services. Cedric isn't answering his phone. Paisley has locked herself in her bedroom and refuses to come out." I looked at my son, his face red with anger, his hair tousled, his shirt collar undone. He looked 10 years older overnight. "I didn't ruin your life, Rowan," I said quietly. "You did that yourself when you decided you could build happiness on lies and manipulation." "That's nonsense." He waved his hands. "Paisley and I built the perfect family, a successful practice, and you destroyed it all with your dirty accusations." "Accusations that turned out to be true," I said calmly. "Or did you come here to tell me I was wrong, that Cedric really is your biological son?" Rowan fell silent, his lips pressed into a thin line. "It doesn't matter," he finally said. "I was his father for 18 years. 18 years of raising him, caring for him, giving him the best of everything. Except the truth," I added, "and the freedom to be himself." Rowan paced around the office like a caged animal. "Why did you do that?" he asked, stopping suddenly. "Why now? Why in public?" I looked at him for a long time, trying to find in this angry, embittered man the boy I once loved more than life itself. "Because you and Paisley planned to send me to a nursing home and take everything I had left," I finally said. "Because you manipulated my finances for years without my knowledge. Because you used Preston's name and my position to advance your career, but treated me like a burden." Rowan's face froze for a moment. Then he tried to feign confusion. "What are you talking about? What nursing home?" "Don't pretend," I shook my head. "I overheard your conversation with Paisley about Sunset Manor, about how you prepared the documents and planned to make me sign them." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, just like Paisley yesterday when Cedric asked her the truth. "It was for your own good," he finally said, deciding to change tactics. "You can't live alone in such a big house. You need care, supervision." "Supervision," I repeated. "That's what you call it." "I call it an attempt to get rid of me so you can gain complete control over my estate." Rowan swallowed. "I have power of attorney." "Which you have misused," I interrupted. "Henry Bradford is already helping me sort this out. We're starting an audit of my finances tomorrow." The mention of Bradford clearly alarmed Rowan. He paled, then his face contorted with anger. "So that's what this is about. Bradford. That old fox has always been jealous of my father, and now he's decided to take it out on me." I shook my head, surprised at how incapable Rowan was of taking responsibility for his own actions. "Henry was your father's best friend, and now he's just helping me protect what is rightfully mine." "You'll regret this," Rowan hissed. "You have no idea what you're playing with." "Is that a threat?" I asked calmly, even though my heart was pounding. He looked at me for a long time, then shook his head. "No, it's a warning, from a son who, despite your betrayal, still cares about you." With that, he turned and left the office, leaving me with mixed feelings. Part of me wanted to believe that somewhere deep inside this bitter man, my son still lived. Another part knew that this was just another manipulation. That evening, Cedric called me. His voice sounded calmer than it had in the morning. "I'm going to Portland, Grandma," he said. "A friend offered to let me stay with him until I decide what to do next." "Have you talked to your parents?" I asked cautiously. "No," he replied firmly, "and I don't plan to anytime soon. I need to figure myself out, to understand who I really am. Without their influence, without their expectations." "I understand," I said softly. "But remember, you can always come back here if you want. This house is always open to you." "Thank you, Grandma," he said, his voice warming. Despite all this chaos, I feel strangely relieved. It's as if I'm now free to be myself. I smiled, recognizing my own thoughts in his words. Sometimes the truth sets us free, even if the process is painful. After talking to Cedric, I went out onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the lake in shades of gold and purple. I thought about Cedric, about how he was coping, about Preston, what he would say if he knew what kind of person our son had become, about myself, a woman who had spent most of her life trying to keep the peace in the family at the expense of her own dignity. For the first time in many years, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Yes, there was a lot of uncertainty ahead. Yes, the scandal would surely haunt our family for a long time to come. But I had finally thrown off the mask of silent consent. I had finally begun to live according to the truth, however bitter it might be. Time passes, even when it seems to us that the world has frozen. Leaves change color, fall, and new ones appear. The lake is sometimes covered with ripples in the summer breeze, and sometimes freezes into a mirror-like surface on quiet autumn days. 4 months have passed since that ill-fated party that changed our lives. 4 months of a new life. For me, for Cedric, for Rowan and Paisley. The first weeks after the scandal were the most difficult. The town was buzzing with gossip. The phone never stopped ringing. Calls came from those who were genuinely concerned about me, and those who were simply hungry for details. I learned to be selective in my communications, allowing only those who truly wished me well into my life. Henry Bradford and his team conducted a thorough audit of my finances. What they discovered exceeded even my darkest suspicions. For years, Rowan had systematically transferred my assets to accounts controlled by him and Paisley. He sold shares that Preston and I had purchased decades ago. He remortgaged the house, which had been paid off in full before Cedric was born. It was all done so skillfully that without professional help, I would never have been able to untangle this web of legal tricks. When Henry presented me with the full picture, I was stunned by the scale of the betrayal. "This isn't just a breach of trust, Mabel," he said seriously. "It borders on criminal offense. We can file a lawsuit and seek not only the return of the funds, but also punishment." I thought long and hard about his words. Could I send my own son to prison, even after everything he had done? In the end, we reached a compromise. Rowan signed an agreement to voluntarily return all assets and formally renounce any future rights to my property. In return, I agreed not to file a criminal complaint. This decision was not easy for me, but in the end, it brought relief. I didn't want revenge, just justice and the opportunity to move on without fear of being left homeless tomorrow. With the return of control over my finances, my freedom returned. I started doing what I had always loved but had given up because of family responsibilities. I returned to painting, a hobby I had enjoyed in my youth. I joined a local book club, where I met several interesting women my age with similar life stories. We quickly found common ground. We had all experienced the loss of our husbands, and we all knew what it was like to feel invisible in our own families. I became especially close to Doris Payne, the widow of a literature professor, a woman with a sharp mind and a soft heart. She lost her husband 5 years ago and, in her words, has since been learning to be herself, not someone else's shadow. "You know, Mabel," she said one day over a cup of tea on my porch, "there is one undeniable advantage to our age. We can finally stop worrying about what others think." I laughed, but there was a deep truth in her words. All my life, I had been a daughter, a wife, a mother, always defining myself through my relationships with others. Now I was learning to just be myself. I learned about Rowena and Paisley mainly from conversations with Linda and other neighbors. They filed for divorce a month after the scandal, and the process turned out to be surprisingly messy for two people who were lawyers and should have understood the value of an amicable agreement. They fought over every piece of property, every bill, every investment. Paisley accused Rowan of emotional abuse and neglecting her career. Rowan accused her of infidelity and fraud. The local newspaper published several articles about their divorce, turning the once respected couple into the object of public condemnation and ridicule. Their law practice fell apart even faster than their marriage. Clients terminated their contracts en masse, unwilling to deal with a firm whose reputation was hopelessly tarnished. By early fall, Hartley and Hartley had closed its doors. and the remaining employees had scattered to other law firms in the city. Cedric didn't communicate with any of us for almost 2 months. He moved to Portland, rented a small apartment, and got a job at a bookstore. He called me occasionally, but the conversations were brief and superficial, as if he wasn't ready to dive into the deep waters of our family history. I didn't pressure him, understanding that he needed time. And then, on one of the first truly cold days of October, he just showed up at my doorstep. He had lost weight and grown out his hair, but his eyes were clear and he had a calm smile. "Hello, Grandma," he said, hugging me. "I'm back. Not for long." We sat in the kitchen, drank tea, and at first talked about trivial things: his job at the bookstore, my new hobbies, how the city had changed over the past few months. But then, when the initial awkwardness disappeared, he looked me straight in the eye and asked, "Tell me everything. I want to know the truth." I took a deep breath. I had been waiting for this moment, but I still wasn't quite ready. "What part of the truth do you want to hear?" "All of it," he replied simply. "From the very beginning, how did you figure out that Rowan wasn't my father? When did it all start?" I told him everything I knew and suspected: about Paisley's strange reservations, about her nervousness when the conversation turned to genetic testing, about the phone call with Griffin Prescott that I overheard by accident, about my observations over the years as he grew up, how Paisley avoided talking about who he looked like, how she exaggerated any resemblance to Rowan or Preston. "But why did you choose that moment to tell the truth?" Cedric asked. "Why at the party in front of everyone?" I told him about that too, about overhearing Rowan and Paisley's conversation, about the plans to send me to a nursing home, about the financial shenanigans. "They didn't just use me, Cedric," I said quietly. "They used you too. Your dreams, your desires never mattered to them. You were just an extension of their ambitions, a way to strengthen their position in society." He was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the bare branches of the apple tree that Preston and I had planted the year he was born. "You know," he finally said, "I always felt that something was wrong, that I didn't fit into their plans, into their world. Now I understand why. I was just the wrong son for them." "No," I took his hand. "You were exactly what you were supposed to be. They were the wrong parents for you." He smiled weakly. "I found him, Grandma, Griffin Prescott, my real father." My heart skipped a beat. "And?" "He didn't know about me," Cedric said. "All these years, he didn't know he had a son. When I went to him and told him the whole story, he was shocked. At first, he didn't believe me, thought it was some kind of scam. But then we did a DNA test, and he really is my father." I squeezed his hand. "How did he react?" "First he was in shock, then angry. At Paisley, at himself for not figuring it out. And then—" Cedric paused. "And then he just hugged me and cried. He said he always wanted children, but it never worked out. That all these years he felt like something important had passed him by. Now he understands what it was." "And you? How do you feel?" Cedric thought for a moment. "Relieved, I guess. I finally understand where my love of art, literature, and history comes from. Griffin is the same. He has a huge library, collects old maps, and travels to historical sites. We're not just alike in appearance, Grandma. We think alike." I smiled, feeling both joy for Cedric and a slight sadness. He had found his real father, a kindred spirit. Rowan had lost a son, not his biological son, but the one he had raised for 18 years. "He's inviting me to live with him," Cedric continued. "He says he wants to make up for lost time, and he supports my decision to go to college to study literature instead of law." "Have you made your decision?" I asked. "Yes," he nodded. "I'm going to Brown like I wanted. Griffin even offered to help with the tuition, although I'm not sure I want to accept his help. It's too soon." "What about your parents?" I asked cautiously. "Have you talked to them?" His face became serious. "Paisley, yes. Once. She came to Portland, somehow found out my address. She cried, apologized, said she always loved me, that she just wanted a better life for me." "And you?" "I listened to her," Cedric shrugged. "I told her I needed time, a lot of time, that I didn't know if I could ever fully forgive her for lying. Not just to me, but to Rowan, to you, to everyone. He paused, then added, She told me how it all happened, about her affair with Griffin, about how she found out she was pregnant but decided that Rowan, with his connections and position, would be a better father for the child than a novice architect with no prospects. How she convinced herself that she was doing the right thing. How over the years the lie became harder and harder to bear, but it was already impossible to confess. Do you believe her? I asked. I don't know, he replied honestly. I don't know who she really is. Has she ever been sincere with me, with anyone? I understood his doubts. Paisley had always been a skilled actress, able to say exactly what people wanted to hear. What about Rowan? I asked. Have you seen him? No, Cedric shook his head. He called a few times, left messages. But I'm not ready. Maybe someday, but not now. He looked at me intently. What about you? Have you seen him? Once, I replied. After Henry and I made him sign the papers to return my assets. He was different. He was angry, then he begged for forgiveness, then he threatened. It was as if he didn't know how he felt. In the end, he left, slamming the door, and hasn't been back since. I'm sorry, Cedric said quietly. Me too, I replied honestly, but not for myself, for him, for the person he has become, for what he has lost. Not money or status, but the ability to be honest, first and foremost with himself. We talked all evening and half the night. Cedric told me about his plans, his new friends in Portland, the books he was reading, his dreams. He had a new confidence, as if, having learned the truth about his origins, he had finally gained the freedom to be himself. He left in the morning but promised to come back more often. He invited me to visit Portland and get to know Griffin Prescott better. I think you'd like him, Grandma, Cedric said as he left. He's different. He's real. After he left, I sat on the porch for a long time, looking at the lake. The water was calm still, reflecting the clear autumn sky. I thought about the vicissitudes of life, about the unexpected twists and turns that fate sometimes presents us with. Who would have thought that at 77 I would start a new chapter in my life, that I would find the strength to resist manipulation, to defend my independence, my right to respect and dignity? On the table next to me lay the book Cedric had brought me as a gift, Late Bloomers by Elizabeth Strout. It's the story of a woman who, in her twilight years, unexpectedly discovers her capacity for profound change. I opened it and began to read, feeling a strange kinship with the main character. The following week, I went to Portland for the first time to attend a book club meeting organized by Doris. 6 women between the ages of 65 and 83, all with rich life experiences, all with stories that could be the basis for novels. We discussed the book, shared our thoughts, and laughed at each other's witty remarks. I felt part of a community, something I hadn't felt in many years. On the way home, I stopped at an art store and bought new paints and brushes. At home, I took out the old easel that had been stored in the attic since Rowan started school, and I no longer had time to paint. I set it up by the window overlooking the lake and started painting, just for myself, with no goal other than the pleasure of the process. Sometimes I thought about Rowan and Paisley, about how their lives had turned out after the collapse of their marriage and careers. According to Linda, Paisley had moved to Portland and taken a job as a lawyer at a small firm, clearly lowering her ambitions. Rowan stayed in Lake Oswego, trying to start his own practice, but clients were slow to trust him with their cases. He sold their house, bought a smaller apartment, and started attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Rumors of his drinking, after the scandal had spread throughout the city. Strangely, I felt neither malice nor satisfaction at their downfall. Only a quiet confidence that justice had prevailed in some sense. Not because they had been punished, but because the truth had finally come out. The truth that, as Preston said, always finds its way to the surface. In December, when the first snow fell, I received a short letter from Rowan. Just a few lines. I made many mistakes, perhaps unforgivable ones. But I want you to know that I loved you in my own way, and I still do. Rowan. No apology, no request for forgiveness, just a statement of fact. I didn't reply, but I kept the letter. Maybe someday, when the wound isn't so fresh, we'll find a way to at least talk to each other. On New Year's Eve, Cedric came to visit with Griffin Prescott. Tall, with a pleasant face and attentive eyes so similar to Cedric's, Griffin was exactly as my grandson had described him: intelligent, well-read, with a light sense of humor. "I don't know how to thank you, Mabel," he said when we were alone, "for revealing the truth, for giving me the opportunity to get to know my son." "I didn't do it for you," I replied honestly, "or even for Cedric. I did it for myself, because I couldn't live a lie anymore." He nodded, understanding. "Still, thanks to you, Cedric and I found each other, and I will be forever grateful for that." The three of us welcomed midnight with glasses of champagne, watching the fireworks over the lake. Cedric talked about his plans for the next semester, and Griffin talked about a project to restore a historic building in Portland. I listened to them, watching their similar gestures, how they finished each other's thoughts, and thought that life is full of surprising twists and turns. Preston liked to say, "It's never too late to start living honestly." At the time, I took these words as the general wisdom of a judge accustomed to dealing with human mistakes and their consequences. Now I understood that it was true in the most literal sense. Even at 77, it's not too late to drop the mask, stop playing the role imposed by others, and start being yourself. I raised my glass to the starry sky. "To new beginnings," I said,